We're going to turn now to look at the supply of literacy skill that's available in the Northwest Territories and how that supply fits with the demand associated with the kinds of jobs that Northwest Territories workers are working in. If we look at the right-hand panel, we're going to begin with how the jobs in the Territory distribute by proficiency level demanded. The yellow box indicates the proportion of jobs that fall at level 3. You'll remember that that's the level we think we need to be competitive in the global economy. A small percentage of level 2 jobs, no level 1 jobs, and then smaller percentages of level 4 and level 5 jobs. So again, workers need level 3, most workers need level 3 in order to be employed in the Territory. If we look at the left-hand panel, it contrasts the general population to the Aboriginal population. And what we see is a larger percentage of Aboriginal workers in the Territory need level 2 skills, a larger proportion need level 3 skills, about the same proportion need level 4 skills, and currently there are no jobs held by Aboriginals at level 5. What this implies is that Aboriginal workers in the Territory will, by definition, earn less than their non-Aboriginal peers. 80% of all the jobs held by Aboriginals require prose literacy skills at level 3 or above. And this opens the question of, are the workers in those jobs, do they have those skill levels? Now turn to look at the supply of literacy skill and how it's expected to change in the Territory over the coming decade. If we look at the left-hand panel first, we see very clearly that the absolute numbers of level 1 and 2 adults stay the same out to 2016. We see a rapid growth in the numbers of people at level 3 and a stable number at level 4-5. If we turn to the right-hand panel, it's the proportion of adults at each proficiency level. And we see very clearly that the proportion of people at level 1 and 2, those people who we think are at economic risk because of their skills, stays stable at about 40% of the entire adult population. This is bad for those individuals and bad for the competitiveness of the territorial economy. If we turn to how the Northwest Territories economy uses the skills of Aboriginals living in the Territory, we see quite a different pattern. And we'll start with Canada. At the Canada level, of all the skills that Aboriginal workers possess, the economy is using about 100% of those skills. And so in economic terms, the market is in equilibrium. Supply and demand are balanced. But that result hides considerable variation from province to province. We'll start with the Yukon Territory to begin with, where currently the economy is only using about 96% of the available supply. So increasing demand there to use more of the available supply would be useful. The situation in Nunavut is the exact opposite, that currently their jobs demand 103% of the available supply. So they have a 3% literacy skill shortage at the aggregate level. And in both territories, these shortages and surpluses represent significant economic potential and costs. The situation in the Northwest Territories is right about in between. Your economy demands about 98% of the available supply, and so there's room for you to increase demand and realize economic gains as a result. We're now going to push further down and look at the fit between the demands of jobs in the Territory and the skills of workers at those skill levels. We begin with band members living off reserve in the Territory, and what we see is huge surpluses of workers at level 1 and 2. So there are more workers with those skill levels than there are jobs for them to inhabit, and shortages of level 3, 4, and 5 workers, where there are jobs at those levels, but the workers do not exist to fill them. For other Aboriginals off reserve, we see a similar but slightly different pattern with a much larger surplus at level 2, more workers at that level than there are jobs, and shortages at level 3, 4, and 5. If we push this utilization story down even further, what we see is 58% of all workers, Aboriginal and non, in the Territory are in literacy skill shortage. They actually have skills that are lower than the level demanded by their job to work satisfactorily, productively, and safely. So this is a huge percentage of workers, and there are enormous economic costs to the firms and the individuals involved and the overall economy. About 30% of workers in the Territory are in balance. This means they have just enough skill for their job, and that doesn't give them any cushion if skill demand were to rise. And the evidence for the Territory is that as mineral exploration and development continues, the knowledge and skill intensity of jobs in the Territory are bound to rise. And then there's about 15% of workers in the Territory that are in literacy skill surplus, where one could realize economic gains by increasing the knowledge intensity of work in order to soak up those surpluses. So if we now then turn and look at, if that was the overall population, how do Aboriginal workers compare in relative terms? Well, it turns out that band members off reserve are 3% more likely than the general population to be in literacy skill shortage. So it's about 61% of all Aboriginal workers who are band members living off reserve don't have the skills to do their job fully and satisfactorily. And because that percentage is so high, they're just slightly less likely to be in balance or in surplus. Situation is about the same for Aboriginals living off reserve in the Territory. They're 3.5 times more likely, so about 62 or 63% of them are in shortage, and very small percentages in balance and surplus. So we've been able to describe the fact that the utilization of skills in the Territory are not in such good shape because supply and demand are not in balance at each of the levels we explored. And so now we're going to turn to talk about what the nature of those skill shortages are, what it would cost to eliminate the skill shortages, and what the potential economic benefits might be to the economy and the individuals involved. So it's about 8,000 out of 13,000 Aboriginal workers in the Territory that have a literacy skill shortage. The happy news is that most of those workers are in literacy segments C and D. This means that they're not illiterate. They've become fluid and automatic readers. What they don't have are the cognitive strategies and skills that are needed to solve and master reading tasks at level 3 and above. People in segments C and D require modest instructional investments to raise them to level 3. So there are a lot of people in the Territory that need help, but the good news is that they don't need very much help, each one of them. So if you add up, given the nature of the literacy skill shortage problem in the Territory and what it costs to offer remedial instruction, we come up with a bill about $17 million for Aboriginal workers in the Territory. So to give those workers the skills to make them competitive in the national and the global economy, about $17 million for band members. And an additional $6 million would get rid of the problem for other Aboriginals in the Territory. So it begs the question, what would you get if you made an investment big enough to solve the problem? The story is as followed, as we saw earlier. Increasing literacy increases productivity rates. And so something that eliminates skill shortages would drive up productivity and drive up earnings. And we have evidence that those earnings are driven up enough that the rates of return would be somewhere between 133% and 350% per year following the investment. So investments in literacy would outperform the stock market by a considerable margin. So having established that literacy matters to individuals and us collectively in the Northwest Territories, We're going to turn to where the problem is in the territory, where educators and policymakers would have to focus the resources. And we start with a map of Yellowknife. In this picture, each neighborhood has a color, and the greener the color, the better the neighborhood is. What we see is there's only a couple of areas that are yellow or orange, and those are places where the proportion of people with level 1 and 2 skills are at their highest. And so we have a clear sense of where the money should go, where programs should be delivered. We've also done a report card for Yellowknife, comparing them to 328 other communities in the country. In terms of the economic demand for literacy skill, they get a very bad rating, an E grade. They rank 323 out of 328, so well down in the rankings. They have about 4.4 million literacy points they could put to economic use, and the people that are employed actually have a very high skill level, average score of 310, which places them well in the middle of level 3. And they're using a staggering proportion of that skill, fully 80%, well above most other communities in the country. In terms of cost, eliminating Yellowknife's literacy skill shortage would cost $4 million, about $792 for each learner that needs help. That investment would precipitate a rapid and dramatic increase in earnings of $23 million a year for each and every year following the investment, increase earnings on a per capita basis for each worker by about $5,000. And finally, even though there is literacy skill shortages, there's also surpluses in Yellowknife, and finding a way to use those surpluses would generate an additional $18 million in additional earnings. So by way of summary, we can say literacy skill is fundamentally important to economic development and social progress in Canada. It's particularly so in the Northwest Territories. Finding ways to increase skill demand, skill supply, and to improve the efficiency of markets that mediate supply and demand would lead to very rapid and large economic benefits for the Territory and Canada. The Aboriginal populations in the Territory have lower skill levels and work in lower skill jobs, and so investing to fix their literacy problems have to be a priority for the Territory. I'm hoping that individuals, employers, and the governments in Canada are able to fix the problem. Thank you. Want to know more about literacy? Go to any of the following websites shown on the screen: the website for Data Angel, the website for Statistics Canada, the website for Bow Valley College, or the website for the Canadian Council on Learning. You'll find out about how important literacy is to Canada's future economic competitiveness and our collective well-being. Thank you.